For decades, Canada stood as the steadfast energy ally of the United States, a silent partner in North America's thriving economy. But a storm brews on the horizon, threatening to shatter this once harmonious relationship. Recent tariffs imposed by Donald Trump have turned the tide of goodwill into a precarious game of brinkmanship. Canada is poised to retaliate with an audacious threat, cutting off its electricity exports. Could this bold move plunge the U.S. into darkness? Ontario Premier Doug Ford didn't hold back during his impassioned address on March 2, 2025. With the weight of his words resonating through the audience, he declared that if Trump's tariffs persist, Canada would employ its trump card, the ability to sever electricity supplies. The tension in the air was palpable, as he stated with a chilling confidence, "I'll do it with a smile on my face if necessary." The implications of his threat are staggering. Canada exported around 65 terawatt-hours of electricity in recent years, and a staggering 90% of that flowed directly into the United States. This was not merely a political dispute, it was a battle foreshadowing a possible trade war, and the stakes couldn't be higher. Trump's tariffs were already wreaking havoc in various sectors, from steel to agriculture, stirring unrest beyond Canada's borders. Could these tariffs ignite the sparks of conflict into an all-out trade blitz that leaves both nations reeling? In response to Ford's drastic proposals, a source close to Prime Minister Justin Trudeau hinted at multiple scenarios under consideration. The underlying message was clear: Canada would not be dismissed lightly. Regions, particularly New York and Vermont, have long thrilled to the hum of power lines carrying vast amounts of clean energy from Canadian hydroelectric plants. What happens if that flow is stifled? Families could suddenly find themselves grappling with soaring electricity costs and supply shortages. The very essence of daily life hangs in the balance as the rhetoric heats up. From the Trump camp, the narrative shifts. A spokesperson insisted that Canada remains a close ally and friend, yet the tone dripped with unresolved tension. The tariffs were positioned as measures of national security, a justification that many Canadians were reluctant to accept. Was this truly a matter of protecting American interests, or just another layer of distortion in the guise of diplomacy? The notion of a historical friendship began to fray at the edges. As Ford's threats linger in the air like an impending storm, energy analysts raise eyebrows at the feasibility of his severe proposals. The intricately woven fabric of power supply between the U.S. and Canada complicates any drastic actions. While a full blackout seems improbable, could Canada resort to cutting back exports? As millions of Americans rely on Canadian energy, any substantial cut could send electricity prices skyrocketing, harming the very constituents Trump aims to protect. As tempers flare and talk of retaliation crescendos, the question becomes one of survival for both countries. How far will Canada go to assert its resolve? Are both nations ready to shoulder the consequences of their escalating feud, or is there a path towards reconciliation? The tension crackles in the air, and the fate of North American energy hangs by a thread. As we delve deeper into this escalating drama, can Canada truly keep the lights off in America? The countdown begins. The tension between Canada and the U.S. has escalated dramatically, fueled by tariffs imposed by Donald Trump. Canadians are demanding action, declaring they will no longer tolerate such economic strain. Headlines buzz with questions about a severe threat: could Canada actually halt its electricity exports to the U.S.? At a press conference on March 2, 2025, Ontario's Premier Doug Ford made a bold statement that electrified the atmosphere. If the Trump administration insists on these unfair tariffs, he declared, we'll use our Trump card. Cutting off electricity exports is on the table. I'll do it and smile while doing it. His words rippled shockwaves through the media, foreshadowing a potential power struggle. Canada's electricity exports to the U.S. are no trivial matter. They reached about 65 terawatt-hours in 2024, with around 90% directed to their southern neighbor. This powerful dependency means that any move by Canada to cut off supply could spell disaster for large swaths of the U.S., leaving cities and towns in the dark. As the sun dipped below the horizon, whispers from sources close to Prime Minister Justin Trudeau hinted at dire measures. Trudeau has been contemplating various responses to Trump's tariffs, reminding the U.S. not to underestimate Canada's impact on its energy supply. States like New York and Vermont, heavily reliant on Canadian hydroelectric power, were at an increasing risk of financial strain if Canada were to decide to pull the plug. Recent statistics revealed that American electricity imports from Canada amounted to roughly $2.3 billion. For many families in the northern states, this tariff could lead to soaring electricity bills and possibly shortages. The looming question now, could Canada actually pull off this audacious move? Meanwhile, the US responded with its own rhetoric, reinforcing its stance and downplaying the psychological impact. A White House spokesperson referred to Canada as a close ally, defending the tariffs as necessary for national security. Yet, political analysts wondered how long this relationship could withstand such heightened tensions. The pressure was intensifying. In the days leading up to a crucial address to Congress, Trump continued to stand by his tariffs, insisting they were vital for protecting American interests. However, in whispers behind closed doors, advisors cautioned him escalating tensions could jeopardize vital energy supplies, leaving Midwestern states in peril. So, where do we go from here? Will political games lead to a literal blackout across the border? The stakes have never been higher as Canada and the US navigate this very tumultuous relationship. Fear and uncertainty hang in the air, each side attempting to maintain their ground in a rapidly evolving scenario that could alter the very fabric of North American energy and trade. As these two former allies brace for what may come next, one question lingers: can Canada really keep the lights off in the US? Earlier we noted that Canada supplies billions of dollars of cheap hydropower to its southern neighbor, keeping families warm and bills low. What would happen if that steady river of electricity vanished in an instant, leaving skyscrapers humming in silence and households shivering in the dark? Imagine the sudden loss of light, the hiss of empty transformers, the cold metal of a refrigerator door that no longer hums. The thought alone sends a shiver down the spine of anyone who relies on that steady glow. On March 3, 2025, the White House pressed a spokesperson into the noon briefing room. Canada remains a close ally, the official said, but the tariffs are purely a matter of national security and fair trade. Reporters heard the sharp click of microphones, the rustle of papers, the subtle tremor in the speaker's voice. The administration vowed to monitor any threats, yet promised the United States would not retreat. The next day, President Trump scheduled a congressional address, planning to defend the trade war with fervor. An article the same day warned senior advisors, escalating tensions could spark power shortages across the Midwest. Trump dismissed the caution, insisting tariffs are the strongest shield for American interests. He also announced reciprocal duties set to begin on April 2, targeting any nation that levies duties on U.S. goods. Can the North American grid truly be yanked off by a single country, or is the threat merely a bluff? We just learned that the electric ties between the two nations run deep, woven into a massive, decades-long infrastructure. Energy analysts stressed that the two grids are tightly interlocked, pulling a single plug would be impossible. Yet intermittent cuts, reduced dam output, or throttled supply remain feasible, with each drop felt like a cold draft against a heated wall. Patterson cited 2023 figures showing Canada's electricity exports to the U.S. valued at roughly $2.3–2.5 billion, vital income for Ontario and Quebec. If the crisis deepens, Ottawa may accept the financial hit to pressure the United States, turning the loss into a diplomatic lever. Experts describe this as high-stakes blackmail, a tactic with historic precedent where energy becomes a weapon. Doug Ford's March 6 declaration echoed a grim resolve. "I'll do it with a smile," he warned, ready to cut power if agricultural tariffs bite. He claimed the 25% duties were unjust, promising to withhold not just electricity but also raw materials like nickel and steel. Such a move would hurt both sides, creating a lose-lose scenario where factories stall and households face darkness. Will Ottawa sacrifice its own revenue and risk internal turmoil to force a concession, or will the looming blackout force a new negotiation before the lights truly go out? A sudden power cut could turn bustling streets into silent, dark alleys. What would happen if the lights that keep North America humming were switched off? Imagine the hum of transformers fading, the smell of ozone disappearing, and a cold, uneasy hush spreading across borders. Could one nation really hold the other's night at ransom? The stakes have never been higher. Brief recap of the earlier segment: Canada's hydro-rich provinces, especially Ontario and Quebec, rely on electricity exports for billions of dollars. If the tariff-driven crisis deepens, Ottawa has hinted it may sacrifice that revenue to pressure the United States, turning a financial loss into diplomatic blackmail, a tactic long used in international power plays. The energy card has always been a potent weapon. On March 6, 2025, Ontario Premier Doug Ford announced, with a grin, that he would not hesitate to flip the switch if needed. He painted Trump's 25% tariffs as unjust, warning that if Canadian farms were blocked, the U.S. would feel the loss of vital electricity. Not only power, he added, we can choke the flow of nickel and steel. The clang of factory hammers, the metallic scent of ore, and the steady roar of turbines could all fall silent. Ford's threat reverberates through factories whose steel bolts and nickel wires stitch together American cars, aircraft, and appliances. A blackout would scar both sides. U.S. manufacturers would scramble for alternative sources, while Canadian exporters would watch profits evaporate. Is this a lose-lose scenario, or a bold gamble to force a tariff retreat? The United States imposed 2530% duties on Canadian steel, aluminum, and farm goods at the start of 2025, squeezing trade volumes. In response, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau declared on February 1, 2025 that the measures were unacceptable and vowed retaliation across sectors. We must defend ourselves, he wrote, framing the tariffs as an attack on Canadian livelihoods. Since then, Ottawa has plotted its next move, with the power cut threat lingering like a storm cloud. If Canada were to halt its energy flow, the impact would ripple across the continent. Midwestern refineries, used to processing Canadian crude 1.4 million barrels daily in 2023, might feel the heat of sudden shortages. States such as Maine, far from other energy hubs, could face soaring electricity bills, potentially costing hundreds of millions. Vermont's partnership with Hydro-Quebec, supplying a quarter of its annual power, and New York's long-term megawatt agreements would hang in the balance. Even a partial reduction, cutting exports by half, could jolt American consumers, inflating their monthly statements and stirring political backlash. Could this pressure force Trump's administration to reconsider, or will it spark a deeper rift between longtime allies? The next weeks promise a tense showdown, where the flick of a switch could reshape a continent's future. What will happen when the lights are threatened? The answer hangs in the darkness, waiting for the first spark. What would happen if the night sky over New York suddenly lost its familiar glow, street lamps flickering out, the hum of the grid fading to silence, all because the northern neighbor decided to yank the plug on its massive electricity exports? Could a single tariff dispute really erase the light that powers homes, factories, and millions of lives? The United States has relied on Canada for clean, cheap power for decades. In 2024, roughly 6,065 terawatt-hours of electricity crossed the border, fueling the Northeast and Midwest. Canada earns billions from this trade, reinvesting in massive hydro dams, while Americans enjoy lower bills. Now, Ontario's Premier Doug Ford warned that if the 25% tariffs remain, Canada may curtail or even halt exports. Will Ottawa dare to follow through, or will the looming blackout force a sudden reversal of policy? Earlier we sketched the high stakes of a possible power cut. Now we examine the fragile agreements that could shatter. Do the hidden contracts that keep New England warm hide a ticking time bomb? I remember a winter night in Quebec, the crisp bite of wind on my cheeks, the distant roar of turbines like giant whales breathing beneath the icy sky. The scent of pine mingled with the electric buzz as the power flowed unhindered. Today, that flow is under threat. States such as Maine and Vermont depend on Canadian hydro. Vermont's pact with Hydro-Quebec promises 25% of its annual energy by 2038. New York has secured megawatt imports through 2030. If Ford's threats materialize, those deals could evaporate, leaving the Northeast scrambling for alternatives. In 2023, the U.S. imported 1.4 million barrels of Canadian crude daily, more than half of its total oil intake, while electricity imports valued at $2.5 billion sustained regional grids. Cutting exports even by half would lift American consumer bills, a move that would hurt the very voters Trump seeks to please. Republican senators warn that de-energizing a friend violates a long-standing treaty of friendship, yet they defend the tariffs as a matter of national security. Canadians, however, question the sincerity of that claim, asking whether true allies would erect such barriers.
The tension rises, and the question burns hotter: can Canada really keep the United States in the dark, and what will the fallout mean for a partnership built on shared currents? What if the lights above your head suddenly vanished? For decades, Canada supplied the United States with cheap, clean power, becoming the continent's hidden energy backbone.
In 2012, the nation exported roughly 65 terawatt-hours of electricity, about 90% flowing south. Now President Trump's 25% tariffs on steel, aluminum and farm goods have turned that partnership into a battlefield.
Consumers wonder, will rising tariffs drive housing costs and factory bills skyward? The stage is set for a shocking showdown. We just saw Canada's retaliation looming.
Ontario Premier Doug Ford warned that, if the tariffs persist, Ottawa will pull the plug on electricity exports, with a smile, if necessary. The United States imports roughly $2.3 billion of Canadian power each year, feeding New York, Vermont and the Great Lakes region. A sudden cut could leave factories humming with silence and households shivering in the dark.
The question burns: can a single province really hold the continental grid hostage? Analysts argue the infrastructure is deeply intertwined, yet limited supply tactics remain possible.
As tensions rise, the next power surge may come from political sparks.
We've traced the tariff war to a potential blackout threat. Trump has hinted at defending the trade battle in a March 4 congressional address, promising that tariffs have revitalized American industry.
Meanwhile, Canada's leaders promise to preserve dignity, even if it means sacrificing billions of dollars in export revenue.
Economists warn this could become a lose-lose scenario, inflating U.S. electricity bills while sparking domestic backlash. Could this energy bluff force the White House to back down, or will it ignite a wider North American trade crisis? The answer hangs in the balance, waiting for the next pivotal speech. What if the familiar hum of the power lines above your home suddenly fell silent because of a tariff tug-of-war?
For years, Canada has been the United States' most reliable energy source, feeding the northern states with clean hydroelectric power and supplying critical minerals. Then a new wave of 25% duties on Canadian steel, aluminum and agricultural goods hit, and the fragile balance began to crumble. The United States insists the tariffs protect national security, while Ottawa cries foul, warning that the price will be paid by both sides.
The stage is set for an unprecedented showdown.
Imagine a bitter March night, the wind rattling the high-voltage towers as officials in Ontario whisper a threat that could darken entire regions. On March 2, 2025, Ontario's premier announced that if the United States refuses to lift the duties, Canada will consider cutting off electricity exports, a move he delivered with a smile. Roughly 65 terawatt-hours of power left Canadian grids in 2012, about 90% of which powered American homes and factories. The value of that flow now hovers around $2.3 billion a year. A sudden reduction, even if only half, would send electric bills soaring and factories grinding to a halt.
Could the faint smell of ozone before a storm be the last cent of power for millions? Can Canada really afford to flip the switch? Federal approval would be required to shut down transmission lines that have been woven together for decades.
Energy analysts warn that a full blackout is unlikely, but throttling output or curbing dam releases could mimic a blackout for consumers in New York,
Vermont and the broader Midwest.
In 2023, the United States imported 1.4 million barrels of Canadian crude each day, and imported about 2.3 billion kilowatt-hours of electricity. If those numbers dip, price spikes could ripple through grocery aisles and fuel pumps. Yet Premier Doug Ford boasts that the Trump card of energy is ready, while Prime Minister Trudeau keeps all options on the table.
What will happen when the April 2 deadline for reciprocal duties arrives? Will the two long-standing neighbors fall into a dark stalemate, or will the pressure of rising electricity costs and strained supply chains force a compromise? Republican senators warned that a war with Canada would hurt both economies, yet the tariffs remain in force.
As the calendar flips to early April, factories hum anxiously, households brace for potential outages, and political leaders weigh the cost of a power cut against the damage of a full-scale trade war. The next move may decide whether North America lives in light or slides into a prolonged shadow.
Earlier we asked whether the clash would stay in tariffs or become a full-scale power blackout. What if the lights across the continent flickered out tomorrow?
The United States imposed a 25% duty on Canadian steel, aluminum and farm goods, and then halted the same levy on Mexico and Canada for a brief pause. Ontario's premier declared that, if the tariffs persisted, Canada would turn off the lights for its southern neighbor. In 2012 the country exported roughly 65 terawatt-hours of electricity, about 90% of which flowed southward. That flow now represents a market worth nearly $2.3 billion each year.
Will Canada actually flip the switch on March 6, or will diplomatic pressure stop it? We just explored the looming threat of a continental dimming. Can a single province wield enough power to cripple an entire nation?
Premier Doug Ford warned that the trump card of cutting electricity exports was on the table, promising to act with a smile if needed. A source close to Prime Minister Justin Trudeau confirmed that the federal government was weighing all scenarios, from reduced output to a staged shutdown of hydro plants. U.S. states such as New York, Vermont and Maine rely on Canadian hydro for up to 25% of their annual demand, and the Midwest imports roughly 1.4 million barrels of Canadian crude daily. If the flow were halved, electric bills could climb sharply and refineries might sputter.
Will Washington answer with even harsher duties, igniting a full-scale energy war? The previous segment showed the escalating standoff over electricity. Imagine hearing the low-frequency hum of transformers fade as families watch their lights dim. Economists warned that a sustained cut would cost the United States billions, while Canada would forfeit a vital revenue stream that funds its own grid upgrades. Both sides have issued statements, Washington pledging to defend the tariffs before Congress on March 4, and Ottawa keeping all options on the table. Public anger could rise as power prices surge and grocery costs climb, pressuring leaders on both sides. Will the leaders choose compromise, or will North America descend into darkness? For nearly 60 years, the United States and Canada have been bound in a mutually beneficial energy relationship. Connecting their resources, more than 35 major electricity transmission lines and 70 pipelines forge ties across their shared border. According to Canadian statistics, in 2021, energy exports to America skyrocketed to an astounding amount of $112 billion, while the U.S. only sent $25 billion in energy back north. Canada is a vital player, supplying 62% of American crude oil imports along with hydroelectric power and natural gas. Yet, as tensions rise, many are left wondering, what is behind the turmoil in U.S.-Canada relations? Observers suggest Trump's antagonism might stem from personal grievances, like failed business ventures in Toronto and Vancouver. Public skirmishes between the two leaders have played out in the media, with Trump labeling Prime Minister Trudeau a hypocrite in the wake of an uncomfortable NATO meeting. The animosity is palpable. But is it merely personal, or does Trump see Canada as an antagonist, merely a deadbeat out to drain American resources? As discussions of tariffs escalate, the stakes are rising. Could Canada resort to cutting off its electricity supply to the U.S.? This shocking possibility has ignited heated debates. If Canada were to pull the plug on electricity exports, areas that rely heavily on this resource could find themselves grappling with severe shortages. The growing murmurs in media are now filled with speculation, warning that both nations could face dire consequences. At a press conference on March 2, 2025, Ontario Premier Doug Ford declared, "If these unfair tariffs persist, we will cut off Canadian electricity exports." His conviction sent shivers down spines. This isn't just posturing. With the U.S. importing about $200 billion in electricity from Canada yearly, the implications are staggering. If Ford follows through on his threat, how many Americans could be left in the dark? Could this turn allies into adversaries overnight? Complicating matters further, U.S. officials defended the tariffs, arguing they were enacted for national security. They insist that Canada must understand the gravity of the situation, dismissing fears of retaliation. Yet from Canadian perspective, this argument rings hollow. Many Canadians feel betrayed, arguing that barriers to trade betray the friendship that has long existed between the two countries. In light of these growing tensions, can Canada truly enforce such a drastic measure, or will both sides find a way to negotiate terms that serve them best? The clock is ticking, and the looming question remains, who will flick the switch first? In a gripping turn of events, the long-standing energy alliance between the United States and Canada hangs by a thread. For nearly 60 years, these neighboring countries have relied on each other for electricity and resources. Underneath this facade of camaraderie, however, tensions are bubbling. As trade tariffs imposed by Donald Trump upset the delicate balance, Canada is making an unprecedented threat. Could they truly cut off the electricity flow to their southern neighbor? As of 2021, Canada's energy exports to the U.S. were valued at a staggering $112 billion. Major electricity transmission lines and pipelines snake across the Canadian border, creating a deep reliance on shared resources. Yet, the U.S. only returned about $25 billion worth in energy imports from Canada. Most concerning? Canada supplied 62% of American crude oil imports in 2024, alongside significant amounts of hydroelectric power and natural gas. With the intricate web of energy dependencies formed over decades, what would happen if this relationship fractured? Trump's hostility towards Canada is fueled not just by economic concerns, but by personal animosities as well. Scandals involving failed business investments in Toronto and Vancouver have left their mark on his judgment. The icy exchanges on the world stage, photos of a seemingly affectionate Trump with European leaders juxtaposed against his brusque comments about Trudeau, paint a hostile backdrop. Trump's short-sighted view turns Canada from ally to adversary, branding them as a nation intent on exploiting the U.S. Canadians, for their part, are not taking this lightly. There's a naive belief that their ally should act with sincerity, yet the reality of high barriers to trade suggests otherwise. The question now looms large: could Canada truly shut off the lights? As each day passes, the economic stakes rise. Homeowners across the U.S. clutch their wallets. How would power shortages redefine their daily lives? The surface calm of shared energy agreements is cracking. Political analysts are raising alarms. Could a sudden blackout that plunges American states into darkness force a re-evaluation of this fraught relationship? Recent threats from Ontario's Premier Doug Ford reveal a new willingness to leverage energy exports as a weapon, teasing at a future where lights could flicker out. The potential for chaos rises alongside the stakes of national pride. Will the U.S. bend to Canada's energy might, or will this spiral into an all-out feud that reshapes North America? Only time will tell how far both nations are willing to go. One thing is clear: this story is far from over, and as tensions escalate, the impact on everyday lives could be profound. What will the next chapter reveal in this high-stakes confrontation? The answer lies in the balance of power, trade, and the unseen forces that keep the lights on across the continent.